He walked into a small bakery to buy a croissant for a woman he didn't love, and walked out facing a past he never knew existed. This story was created by the author of this channel. Watch until the end and share your thoughts in the comments. Ethan Reed had never planned to stop at the bakery himself. His days were usually mapped out by assistants, meetings, and calls that began before sunrise and ended long after the city fell asleep. But that morning felt strangely hollow, and when his fiancée mentioned, almost absent-mindedly, that she loved real croissants, warm ones, not the kind delivered in boxes, he volunteered to get them himself. It sounded simple enough, and perhaps he wanted a few minutes alone, away from a life that no longer felt like his own. The bakery was small, tucked between two older buildings, its windows slightly fogged from the warmth inside. As Ethan pushed the door open, a soft bell rang above his head, and the scent of butter, sugar, and fresh bread wrapped around him instantly. It was the kind of smell that made memories surface without permission. For a moment he stood still, adjusting his coat, letting his eyes get used to the light. And then he saw her. She stood near the oven, focused and calm, wearing a white baker's uniform lightly dusted with flour. Her brown hair was pulled back neatly, a few loose strands framing her face. When she turned slightly, he caught a glimpse of her blue eyes, and the world seemed to tilt. Emily. The name echoed in his mind before he could stop it. 3 years had passed, but the recognition was immediate and merciless. She looked older, stronger somehow, but unmistakably the same woman he had walked away from without a proper goodbye. Ethan took an unconscious step forward, his heart beating faster than it had during any business deal, but he froze when he noticed the small figure beside her. A little girl, no more than 3 years old, stood on a wooden stool, wearing a pink dress and an oversized white baker's hat that kept slipping over her forehead. She laughed as Emily gently adjusted it, her laughter light and unguarded. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. Too familiar. Painfully familiar. Emily smiled at the child, a smile that Ethan had once dreamed of seeing every morning. His chest tightened as the realization crept in slowly, terrifyingly. He told himself not to assume, not to imagine things that could not possibly be true, but his mind refused to obey. The girl's profile, the curve of her smile, even the way she tilted her head felt like reflections of himself he had never known existed. Emily turned slightly, her gaze flickering toward the counter, and for a fraction of a second their eyes met. Something passed between them, sharp and silent. Recognition. Shock. Pain carefully hidden behind years of restraint. Almost instantly, she looked away, her expression smoothing into professional calm, as if he were nothing more than another customer. Ethan moved to a small table near the window without ordering anything. He sat down slowly, his thoughts tangled and loud. Outside, the city moved on as usual, unaware that his carefully structured life had just cracked open. He watched Emily work, watched the way she spoke softly to the child, watched the girl cling to her leg as if the world made sense only from that spot. The croissants were forgotten. The fiancée waiting at home faded into irrelevance. All Ethan could do was sit there, staring at the past he thought he had buried, now standing a few steps away, warm and alive, with a child who felt far too much like a consequence he had never been brave enough to face. Emily felt his presence before she truly allowed herself to acknowledge it. There was a subtle shift in the air, the kind she had learned to recognize over years of working long hours among strangers. Someone was watching her, not casually, not with curiosity, but with a weight that pressed against her back. She kept her hands moving, shaping dough, checking the oven, guiding muscle memory to do what her mind was struggling to ignore. She knew it was him. The sound of the bell at the door had cut too deeply into her chest for it to be anyone else. 3 years had not dulled that instinct. 3 years had only taught her how to survive it. Emily did not turn around. She focused instead on Lily, who was happily dusting a small tray with flour, her tiny nose wrinkled in concentration. The sight grounded her. Lily was real. Lily was here. Lily was the reason Emily had learned to be stronger than heartbreak. Careful, sweetheart, Emily said gently, brushing excess flour from the counter. Not too much, or the dough won't like it. Lily giggled, completely unaware of the man sitting just a few steps away whose world had already begun to collapse. The dough likes me, she declared confidently, adjusting the white baker's hat that kept slipping over her eyes. Emily smiled despite herself. That smile, however, did not reach her heart. Her pulse was racing, and every instinct told her to gather Lily into her arms and leave through the back door. But she did not. Running had been her choice once, and it had cost her more than she could ever explain. She would not run again. From the corner of her eye, she saw Ethan sit down at a table near the window. He did not order. He did not check his phone. He simply sat there, watching, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Emily felt exposed in a way she had not felt in years, as if the walls she had built so carefully were suddenly transparent. She remembered the last time she had seen him. The silence that followed unanswered calls. The moment she realized she was alone, carrying a future that terrified her. She had cried then. She had broken. And then she had rebuilt herself piece by piece, without him. Now he was here, uninvited, unexpected, and dangerously close to the life she had protected at all costs. Ethan watched every movement, every small interaction between mother and child, his mind searching desperately for logic. He told himself it could be coincidence, that resemblance meant nothing, that the world was full of blue-eyed children. Yet the more he watched, the more denial slipped through his fingers. The way Lily leaned into Emily, the effortless trust, the quiet intimacy between them spoke of years, not moments. When Emily finally brought a tray of pastries to the front counter, she felt his eyes lift again. This time, she met his gaze deliberately. Her face was calm, controlled, almost distant. If he expected recognition, warmth, or even anger, he would receive none of it. She nodded politely, as she would to any customer. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady. The words nearly undid him. "Morning," Ethan replied, his voice lower than he intended. There was so much he wanted to say that nothing came out right. The silence between them stretched, heavy and awkward, until Lily's small voice filled it. "Mom, is that man sad?" she asked, peering curiously toward Ethan. Emily's breath caught for half a second before she recovered. She knelt beside Lily, smoothing her dress. "Some people just have a lot on their minds," she said softly. Ethan swallowed hard. He felt seen and invisible at the same time. Emily stood again, turning back toward the ovens, her heart pounding. She had made her choice the moment she stayed. She would protect Lily. She would not explain herself. And she would not let the past take more from her than it already had. But as the minutes passed and Ethan did not leave, she understood one terrifying truth. This was only the beginning. Ethan stayed until the bakery emptied and filled again. Time moved strangely inside those warm walls, stretching and folding in on itself, while outside the city rushed forward without hesitation. He watched customers come and go, listened to the rhythm of orders and soft laughter, and noticed how Emily moved with quiet confidence, as if she belonged exactly where she was. That realization unsettled him more than anything else. She had built a life without him, a life that did not pause or crack simply because he had walked back into it. He ordered a coffee eventually, mostly to give himself a reason to remain seated. It grew cold in his hands as he watched Lily climb down from her stool and sit at a small table with a coloring book. Emily brought her a glass of milk without being asked, brushing a kiss over her hair with practiced tenderness. The gesture was so natural that it hurt. This was not a temporary arrangement, or a passing phase. This was motherhood, lived daily, patiently, lovingly. Ethan's thoughts drifted backward despite his efforts to stay grounded. He remembered Emily years ago, standing behind a cafe counter, teasing him for always working too much, telling him that life could not be postponed forever. He had smiled back then, confident and distracted, believing there would always be time. He had believed wrong. Emily felt the weight of his presence growing heavier as the hours passed. She told herself that if he had something to say, he would say it. Yet he remained silent, watching, learning, absorbing details he had no right to know. Every glance made her chest tighten, not with longing, but with fear. Fear that Lily would ask questions she was not ready to answer. Fear that Ethan would demand answers she had sworn never to give. At one point, Lily slipped away from her table and wandered closer to Ethan, curiosity shining openly on her face. Emily noticed too late. "Hi," Lily said brightly, standing beside his chair. "Do you like croissants?" Ethan looked up, startled, then softened instantly. "I do," he replied gently. "They're my favorite." Lily nodded, satisfied. "Mom makes the best ones." "I believe that," he said, his voice thick with emotion he struggled to control. Emily approached quickly, masking her tension with calm authority. "Lily, sweetheart, back to your table, please." Lily obeyed, though she glanced back once, puzzled. Ethan watched her go, then looked up at Emily, their eyes meeting again, this time without pretense. "She's wonderful," he said quietly. Emily held his gaze, her expression unreadable. "She is." There were 1,000 questions behind his words, and she felt every one of them. Still, she did not offer answers. She turned away, returning to her work, leaving him with nothing but observation and doubt. When evening came and the bakery lights softened, Ethan finally stood. He walked to the counter, placing money down for pastries he barely noticed. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said, not as a threat, not as a promise, but as a statement. Emily paused, then looked at him steadily. "This is my workplace," she said. "Not a place for unfinished conversations." "I know," Ethan replied. "I won't cause trouble." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. It was not permission, but it was not rejection either. As he left, the bell rang again, sharp and final. Emily exhaled slowly, leaning against the counter for support. She knew now that avoidance would no longer protect her. The past had found her, and it was patient. And Ethan, walking out into the cool evening air, knew one thing with terrifying clarity. He was no longer there for croissants. He was there for answers, for truth, and for a child who might change everything he thought he knew about himself. The next morning began earlier than usual for Emily. She arrived at the bakery before sunrise, unlocking the door while the street outside was still quiet and empty. The routine calmed her. Mixing dough, heating the ovens, preparing trays all gave her hands something steady to do while her thoughts refused to slow down. She had barely slept, her mind replaying every look, every word, every second of Ethan sitting there, as if he had nowhere else to be. Lily sat at the small table in the corner, swinging her legs as she colored, humming softly to herself. Emily watched her for a moment longer than necessary, committing the sight to memory the way parents did when they sensed change approaching. She brushed a kiss into Lily's hair and reminded herself that no matter what happened, this little girl was her responsibility, her center, her unshakable truth. When the bell above the door rang again later that morning, Emily felt it before she heard it. She did not need to turn around to know who had entered. Ethan's presence carried a weight that made the room feel smaller, more fragile. He did not approach immediately. He took a seat at the same table by the window, ordered a coffee this time, and waited. Emily worked in silence, aware of every movement, every glance reflected in the glass of the display case. She wondered what he expected from her. An explanation? An apology? A confession delivered neatly over coffee? Life had never worked that way, and she had learned that the hardest truths were rarely spoken on schedule. Ethan watched her with a different kind of attention now, quieter, more restrained. The shock of recognition had settled into something heavier. He noticed the small details he had missed the day before, the faint scar on her wrist, the way she leaned slightly to one side when lifting heavy trays, the tired strength in her eyes. This was not the Emily he remembered frozen in the past. This was someone who had lived, struggled, adapted. At one point, Lily looked up from her drawing and noticed him again. She frowned thoughtfully, then slid off her chair and walked over, stopping a careful distance away. "Are you coming back again tomorrow?" she asked him seriously. Ethan hesitated, glancing at Emily instinctively. Emily stiffened but did not intervene. "If that's okay," he said gently. Lily considered this, then nodded as if granting approval. "You can sit there," she said, pointing to the chair. "But Mommy works a lot." "I see that," Ethan replied softly. Emily turned sharply then, her voice calm but firm. "Lily, back to your table." Lily obeyed, though she looked confused. Emily felt guilt rise in her chest. She hated being sharp with her daughter, but fear made her cautious. Boundaries mattered. Silence mattered. Control mattered. Later, when the bakery was briefly empty, Ethan stood and approached the counter slowly, as if every step required permission. "Emily," he said quietly, "I'm not here to disrupt your life." She met his gaze, her expression guarded. "Then why are you here?" He struggled for a moment, then chose honesty. "Because I think there's something I should know. And something you've carried alone." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "Thinking doesn't make it true," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I won't stop caring just because it's uncomfortable." That was the moment she realized this was no longer about avoidance. This was about timing, and the timing had arrived whether she was ready or not. She turned away, pretending to adjust the oven, buying herself a few seconds to breathe. "You don't get to walk back in and demand truth," she said quietly, her back still to him. "I'm not demanding," Ethan replied. "I'm asking." Emily closed her eyes briefly. The word landed differently than she expected. Asking meant choice. Asking meant patience. It frightened her more than pressure ever could. She turned back to him, her voice steady but tired. "Then understand this," she said. "Whatever you think you're looking for, it will not come easily. And it may not come at all." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'll accept that." As he returned to his seat, Emily felt something shift inside her, subtle but undeniable. The past was no longer just watching from a distance. It was moving closer, careful but persistent. And for the first time since she had built her life around survival, Emily wondered whether facing it might be more dangerous than running ever was. By the 5th day, Ethan's presence had become part of the bakery's rhythm, and that frightened Emily more than his sudden appearance ever had. He arrived early, always before the rush, took the same seat near the window, and ordered the same coffee. He never rushed her, never interrupted her work, and never pushed for answers. That patience felt dangerous. Silence, she had learned, could be a strategy just as powerful as words. Emily tried to convince herself that she was imagining the tension, that this was simply a man lingering too long over a cup of coffee. But every glance she caught in the reflection of the glass told her otherwise. Ethan watched Lily with a quiet intensity, as if he were memorizing details he feared might be taken away from him. The way she laughed when flour puffed into the air. The way she dragged a chair closer to the counter so she could see her mother better. The way she looked toward him sometimes, curious and unafraid. That curiosity worried Emily the most. "Mom," Lily asked softly at one point, coloring paused mid-stroke, "why does that man look at me like he knows me?" Emily's hand stilled for just a fraction of a second. She forced herself to keep her voice even. "Some people see things that remind them of someone they once knew," she said carefully. Lily accepted the answer easily, as children often did, and returned to her drawing. Emily did not. The truth pressed against her ribs, heavy and insistent. She had told herself that not telling Ethan had been an act of protection, that she had saved all of them from a complicated life shaped by expectations and power. Standing there now, watching him watch their daughter, she wondered if protection and fear had become impossible to separate. Ethan sensed the shift even before Emily spoke to him again. The air between them felt tighter, more fragile, as if one careless word could shatter it. He stayed seated longer than usual that afternoon, waiting for a moment that felt right but never came. When the bakery finally quieted and Lily fell asleep on a bench with a coloring book in her lap, Emily approached him without ceremony. "We need to be clear," she said quietly, resting her hands on the counter. "You can't build a story in your head and expect me to live inside it." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'm not asking you to," he replied. "I'm trying to understand what I'm seeing." Her eyes met his, sharp and searching. "And if what you're seeing changes everything?" "Then I'll live with that," he said. "I've lived with worse." The honesty in his voice unsettled her. Emily turned away, pretending to tidy the counter, buying time she did not have. Memories surfaced uninvited. The night she had told him she needed him to stay. The way he had looked torn but silent. The moment she realized that silence was an answer. "I didn't tell you because you were already gone," she said at last, not looking at him. "Not physically. But everywhere else." Ethan absorbed the words without defense. "You're right," he said quietly. "I was." The admission cracked something open between them. Emily felt tears threaten, but she forced them back. She had learned long ago that crying did not change outcomes. Lily stirred then, rubbing her eyes. "Mom," she murmured. Emily moved instantly, lifting her gently, her voice soft and soothing. Ethan watched, something close to reverence in his expression. In that moment, Emily understood that whatever she decided next would shape more than just her own life. It would shape Lily's understanding of truth, of trust, and of whether people who left were allowed to come back. As Ethan stood to leave, he paused at the door, hand resting briefly on the frame. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said quietly. "I just don't want to miss what I already have." Emily did not answer. She watched him go, the bell ringing softly behind him, and pressed her daughter closer. The bakery felt smaller without him, and that realization scared her more than she was ready to admit. The sixth morning felt heavier than the others, as if the air itself sensed that something was close to breaking. Emily woke before her alarm, staring at the ceiling while Lily slept curled beside her, one small hand wrapped tightly in the fabric of her shirt. For a long moment, Emily simply watched her daughter breathe, steady and peaceful, and wondered how something so small could carry so much of her past and future at once. At the bakery, the routine unfolded as usual, but Emily felt every second more sharply. She measured ingredients carefully, checked the ovens twice, and spoke less than normal. Her thoughts kept circling the same questions she had avoided for years. How long could she keep pretending? How long before Lily began asking the questions Emily feared most? And how long before Ethan stopped being patient? He arrived later than usual that day. Emily noticed immediately, her heart sinking with a strange mix of relief and disappointment. When the bell finally rang, she looked up despite herself. Ethan stepped inside quietly, his expression more serious than before, his coat damp from the morning rain. He did not sit down right away. Instead, he stood near the door for a moment, as if deciding whether he belonged there at all. Lily noticed him first. She slid off her chair and ran toward him with unfiltered enthusiasm. "You came back," she said, smiling up at him. Ethan knelt instinctively, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "I did," he replied softly. Emily froze. She had not invited that closeness. She had not prepared for it. But Lily had already decided, and that frightened her more than any confrontation with Ethan ever could. As the day progressed, Emily found herself watching them when she thought no one noticed. Ethan listened to Lily with full attention, reacting to her stories as if they mattered deeply, asking gentle questions without overwhelming her. He never touched her without permission, never crossed a line, but his presence filled the space naturally, as though it had always been meant to. That afternoon, When the bakery emptied for a brief stretch, Emily finally spoke. "You're becoming part of her world," she said quietly, standing behind the counter. "And I didn't agree to that." Ethan straightened, his expression calm but alert. "I won't take a step you don't allow," he said. "But I won't pretend she doesn't matter to me either." Emily's throat tightened. "You don't get to decide that." "No," he agreed. She already did. The truth of it struck harder than she expected. Lily had chosen curiosity over fear, openness over caution. Emily realized then that control had been her shield for so long that she no longer knew how to lower it without feeling exposed. That evening, after closing, Emily asked Ethan to stay. The words surprised even her. Lily sat nearby, drawing quietly, sensing the seriousness in the room. "There's something you need to know," Emily said, her voice steady but tired. "And once I say it, nothing goes back to the way it was." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "I'm ready." She took a breath that felt like stepping off a ledge. "Lily is yours." The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan did not speak immediately. He did not move. His eyes flicked to Lily, then back to Emily, as if confirming that reality had finally caught up with his thoughts. "I thought so," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "But hearing it is different." Emily watched his reaction closely, searching for fear, anger, blame. She found none of it. Instead, she saw something raw and unguarded, something that looked painfully close to grief. "I should have been there," Ethan said quietly. "I should have known." Emily shook her head. "You were busy becoming who your parents needed you to be. I couldn't wait for you to become who we needed." The honesty hung between them, heavy but necessary. Lily looked up then, sensing the shift. "Are you sad?" she asked Ethan. He smiled gently, though his eyes were wet. "No," he said. "I think I'm finally where I should be." Emily felt tears slide down her cheeks without resistance. The truth was out now, irreversible and terrifying. She had crossed the line she had guarded for years, and there was no turning back. As Ethan left that night, he paused at the door, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I won't disappear again," he said. "Not from her. Not from you. Even if it takes time." Emily nodded slowly, holding Lily close as the bell rang behind him. The bakery felt quieter than ever before, but beneath the fear and uncertainty, something else had begun to grow. Relief. The truth did not explode the way Emily had always feared it would. Instead, it settled into the space between them, heavy but quiet, demanding to be carried rather than escaped. The morning after her confession, the bakery felt different, as if the walls themselves were listening. Emily moved more slowly, aware that every ordinary action now existed in a world where nothing was ordinary anymore. Ethan arrived later than usual, not out of hesitation, but intention. He did not want to intrude, did not want Lily's first memory after the truth to be one of tension. When he finally stepped inside, Lily looked up from her drawings and smiled at him without uncertainty, as if nothing fundamental had changed. That smile both steadied and broke him. Emily watched closely as Ethan greeted Lily, careful and gentle, keeping the same respectful distance he always had. He did not claim her. He did not say the word that burned in his chest. He simply asked her what she was drawing and listened as if it were the most important thing in the world. Emily felt something loosen inside her, a knot she had kept tight for years. Later, when Lily was distracted with a tray of cookies and crayons, Ethan approached the counter, his voice low and controlled. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "I know it cost you something." Emily met his gaze, tired but steady. "It cost me fear," she replied. "And I'm tired of living inside it." They spoke quietly, in fragments, between customers and ovens. Ethan asked practical questions, not invasive ones. He wanted to know Lily's routines, her favorite foods, the things that scared her at night. Emily answered honestly, surprised by how natural it felt to share details she had once guarded fiercely. That afternoon, Ethan did something that startled her. He asked permission. "I'd like to take her to the park sometime," he said carefully. "With you. If you're ready." Emily hesitated, the instinct to protect rising sharply, then slowly easing. "We'll see," she said. "One step at a time." He nodded, accepting the boundary without disappointment. That acceptance mattered more than any promise. As days passed, Ethan's presence shifted from observer to participant, but never without Emily's consent. He learned Lily's habits, her moods, her small fears. He learned when to step in and when to step back. Emily noticed how Lily began to glance toward the door in the mornings, how her laughter came more easily, how her world seemed to widen without losing its center. One evening, after closing, Emily sat alone at a small table while Ethan swept the floor, an awkward task for a man who usually commanded rooms without lifting a finger. She watched him work, aware of how much he was willing to relearn for the sake of something real. "I never hated you," she said quietly. Ethan stopped, looking at her with surprise. "I know," he replied. "That almost makes it harder." She nodded. Hate would have been simpler. They shared a small, tired smile, one shaped by honesty rather than nostalgia. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting warm light through the windows. Inside, something fragile but real was taking shape, built not on apologies or grand gestures, but on patience, respect, and the courage to stay. Emily did not know what the future would demand of them. She only knew that for the first time since Lily was born, she was no longer carrying the truth alone. And that, more than anything, made the weight bearable. Change rarely announced itself loudly. It arrived in small, unsettling ways, and Emily felt it most clearly in the quiet moments when she was no longer bracing for impact. One afternoon, she realized she had stopped flinching every time the bell over the door rang. Another evening, she noticed that Lily no longer asked who was coming tomorrow, only whether Ethan would be there. The shift frightened her because it felt natural, and natural things were the easiest to lose. Ethan was careful not to overstep, but he was no longer distant. He learned the bakery's rhythms, the hours when Emily needed silence, and the moments when a simple conversation helped her breathe. He learned that Lily hated loud noises but loved stories about animals, that she preferred warm milk before bed, and that she trusted easily but remembered disappointments longer than people expected. Each detail felt like a responsibility placed gently into his hands. Emily watched him take that responsibility seriously. He did not arrive with solutions or expectations. He arrived with time. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Time was what she had needed years ago, what she had learned to survive without. Seeing him offer it freely now stirred a complicated mix of gratitude and grief. The first outing happened on a quiet weekday afternoon, when the bakery closed early. They walked to a nearby park together, Lily skipping between them, her small hand alternating without thought. Emily noticed when it happened and nearly pulled away, then stopped herself. Lily laughed, unaware of the silent decision unfolding around her. Ethan kept his pace slow, listening more than speaking. He let Lily lead them to the swings, waited patiently while she insisted on being pushed higher, and laughed when she declared herself the bravest baker in the world. Emily sat on a bench nearby, watching from a distance that felt both safe and lonely. When Lily ran back toward her, breathless and glowing, Emily realized something painful and undeniable. This was not a temporary curiosity for Lily. This was attachment, forming quietly and confidently. The weight of that truth pressed against Emily's chest, demanding honesty she was not sure she was ready to give. That evening, after Lily fell asleep clutching her favorite stuffed animal, Emily sat across from Ethan at the kitchen table. The light was low, the room quiet, the moment fragile. "You're becoming important to her," Emily said softly. Ethan did not deny it. "She's important to me," he replied. "But I know that doesn't give me rights." Emily looked at him carefully. "It gives you responsibility." He nodded, accepting the word without hesitation. "Then I'll carry it." The simplicity of the answer undid her. She had expected negotiation, fear, even resistance. Instead, she saw steadiness. Not confidence born of power, but of choice. The next days deepened that sense of cautious stability. Ethan adjusted his work schedule without announcing it. He stopped mentioning his fiancée entirely, as if the future planned for him by others had already lost its relevance. Emily noticed, but did not comment. Some changes did not need witnesses. One afternoon, Lily drew a picture and brought it proudly to Ethan. It showed 3 figures holding hands beneath a crooked sun. "That's us," Lily said simply. Emily's breath caught. Ethan knelt to Lily's level, careful with his words. "It's a nice picture," he said. "Thank you for including me." Lily smiled, satisfied, and ran off. Emily turned away, blinking rapidly. Ethan stood beside her without touching, giving her space even in the moment that mattered most. "I won't rush you," he said quietly. "Or her." Emily nodded, her voice barely steady. "I know." For the first time since the truth had been spoken, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by fear. It was still uncertain, still fragile, but it existed. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing was realizing that hope had returned when you were no longer guarding against it. The fragile balance they had built was tested sooner than Emily expected, not by emotion, but by reality. One quiet morning, as she prepared the bakery for the day, her phone rang with a number she had not seen in years. She stared at the screen for several seconds before answering, already sensing that whatever peace she had begun to accept was about to be challenged. It was Ethan's mother. The conversation was polite, controlled, and sharp beneath the surface. She spoke of obligations, of appearances, of concern for Ethan's future, and the confusion surrounding his sudden change in priorities. She never mentioned Lily by name, but Emily heard her presence in every pause, every carefully chosen word. When the call ended, Emily stood still in the empty bakery, her hands trembling slightly as she set the phone down. The past had found another way in. That afternoon, Ethan arrived later than usual, his expression tired but resolute. Emily said nothing at first, letting him notice the change in her on his own. He always did. When the bakery quieted, she told him about the call, her voice calm but edged with something raw. "They're going to fight this," she said. "Not loudly. Not directly. But they won't disappear." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing a familiar weight. "I know," he replied. "They already are." Emily looked at him sharply. "Then why are you still here?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Because walking away would be easier. And I'm done choosing easy." The certainty in his voice unsettled her. Emily had built her life around self-reliance, around the belief that people left when things became complicated. Seeing Ethan stand firm when pressure returned forced her to confront the walls she still kept in place. That evening, Lily sensed the tension even without understanding it. She sat quietly, drawing slower than usual, her eyes flicking between the two adults. When Emily tucked her into bed later, Lily wrapped her arms around her neck tightly. "Are you scared, Mommy?" she whispered. Emily swallowed hard. "A little," she admitted. Lily thought about this, then nodded. "It's okay. I'm not scared when Ethan is here." The words stayed with Emily long after Lily fell asleep. They were simple, innocent, and impossibly heavy. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to imagine what it would mean to deny that sense of safety to her child out of fear alone. The following days brought more pressure. Ethan's parents requested meetings. Lawyers called. Offers were made, carefully disguised as solutions. Ethan refused them all. He stopped explaining himself. He stopped justifying his choices. Instead, he showed up every morning at the bakery, every afternoon at the park, every evening when Lily asked him to read a story. Emily watched him absorb the consequences of his decisions without complaint. The man who once chose silence was now choosing visibility, vulnerability, and conflict if necessary. That realization shifted something deep inside her. One night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Emily sat beside Ethan on the couch, the space between them smaller than it had ever been. She did not reach for his hand, but she did not move away either. "I can't promise this will be easy," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for easy," Ethan replied. "I'm asking for real." Emily nodded slowly. She was still afraid. The fear had not vanished. But it no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a doorway. For the first time since he had walked into the bakery for a croissant, Emily understood that this story was no longer about the past catching up with them. It was about whether they were brave enough to choose a future that did not belong to anyone else's expectations. And for the first time, she believed that they might be. The decision did not come with fireworks or dramatic declarations. It arrived quietly, one ordinary morning, when Emily realized she was no longer waiting for something to go wrong. The bakery opened as usual, the ovens warmed the room, and Lily sat at her little table drawing suns and crooked houses. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, shaking rain from his coat, and for the first time Emily did not feel tension at the sound of the bell. She simply felt relief. Life had rearranged itself without asking permission. Ethan had changed in ways that could not be undone. He no longer spoke about obligations that came from his parents or expectations set long before he understood who he was supposed to become. The fiancée chosen for him had faded into a closed chapter, handled quietly and without cruelty. He did not speak of it often, but Emily saw the cost in the exhaustion behind his eyes and the determination that followed him everywhere now. That afternoon, Ethan asked Emily if they could talk after closing. His voice was calm, but she sensed the weight behind the request. When the last customer left and Lily was busy stacking napkins in uneven piles, they sat at a small table near the window, the same place where Ethan had once sat in silence, afraid to speak. "I want to do this right," he said carefully. "Not quickly. Not because it feels good in the moment." Emily studied his face, searching for the man who once walked away. She did not find him. "What does right mean to you?" she asked. "It means showing up," Ethan replied. "Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it costs me things I thought defined me. It means choosing you and Lily every day, not just when it's easy." The honesty in his words did not overwhelm her. It steadied her. Emily realized then that love, when it was real, did not ask her to abandon herself. It asked her to stand beside someone who was willing to stand as well. That evening, Lily surprised them both by announcing that she wanted to bake something special. The kitchen filled with laughter and flour, with small hands making big messes and Ethan learning the hard way that dough did not respond to authority. Emily watched them from the counter, her heart aching in a way that felt almost peaceful. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep with flour still dusted in her hair, Emily and Ethan stood together in the quiet apartment. The city lights glowed softly through the window, reflecting a future that still felt fragile but no longer unreachable. "I can't promise that I won't be afraid," Emily said softly. Ethan nodded. "Neither can I." She took a breath, feeling the weight of the years she had spent protecting herself, protecting Lily, protecting a life built from necessity. Then she let it go. "But I can promise I won't run," she said. Ethan reached for her hand, slow and careful, giving her time to pull away if she needed to. She didn't. The contact felt simple and right, not dramatic, not overwhelming. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet choice being made inside a small apartment above a bakery. It was not a perfect ending, not a fairy tale resolution. It was something better. It was real. And for the first time since the morning Ethan had walked in for a croissant, all three of them were finally moving forward together. As the author of this story, I see it as a quiet reminder that life rarely gives us second chances wrapped in comfort. Sometimes they come disguised as interruptions, unfinished conversations, and truths we are afraid to face. This story is not about wealth or status, but about responsibility, courage, and the decision to stay when leaving would be easier. The story teaches that love is not proven by promises or grand gestures, but by presence, patience, and the willingness to change. It shows that protecting someone does not always mean hiding the truth, and that healing begins when fear is replaced with honesty. Most of all, it reminds us that real family is built through everyday choices, not perfect timing. This story was fully imagined and written by the author of this channel. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to support the author and rate this story from 1 to 10 in the comments.